Yeah, I think we are live. Okay, 1 minute.
Hmm. Yeah.
Can you just check YouTube in the meantime? I think we are.
Yeah. 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 It's on YouTube. Yeah, we're on YouTube. So all of this is going to go into the stream. I can't hear you, Romy. I think you're mute. Like you've muted yourself.
Okay, but can you see us on YouTube?
Yeah.
Okay, I think we will go live on Facebook in like a second. Okay, I think we're live on Facebook.
As well. Okay.
Okay, yeah. So also, hi, we are live on Facebook and YouTube now.
All right.
Great. Thanks, Romy.
Yeah.
Hi, Sahej.
Okay. More time.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. My name is Mort Chatterjee. I'm one half of Chatterjee and Lal. We're a gallery based in Bombay, working with contemporary art and historical material. And today's session is a Chatterjee and Lal and Culture Bagh event. Culture Bagh is an organization which looks to film screenings, seminars, talks, musical recitals, and other cultural events allied to the gallery programming. And over the last couple of months since lockdown, we've put on couple of events, the last one being the Gagan Singh workshop, which was a couple of weeks ago. And today we are going to be joined by my good friend, Sahej Rahal. We've been exhibiting Sahej's work now since 2013. And over the last 7 years, we have had 3 solo exhibitions with Sahej: Forerunner, Adversary, and most recently Juggernaut. And really, I suppose the thread which connects all of them is the fact that Sahej is a storyteller by nature, and his stories have a habit of weaving together fact and fiction to create counter mythologies that often interrogate the dominant mythologies shaping the present. And we often find this myth-making world taking the shape of sculptures, performances, films, paintings, installations, and AI programs. So today in the virtual studio session, we've asked Sahej to think about these aspects, and he will trace the formation of the non-human from the mythological relationships of demons and diseases to futuristic worlds inhabited by artificial intelligence. So this is a little bit of a paper as well as a little bit of a online studio visit. It's a first of its kind, I think, and this is also the first time that we're streaming to multiple platforms. So we're on YouTube, our YouTube channel, Facebook Live, and we're on Zoom. It's all too much technology for me. So with that, I think I'd like to pass over to Sahej if you're there. And thanks so much, and really looking forward to this.
Thanks, Maud, for that very kind introduction, and also just shout out to Romy, who's the kind of techno wizard who's made sure that we're like on everywhere on Facebook, on Zoom, and YouTube, and she's the one who kind of manage that. So it's really cool. So okay, so I'm gonna start by just sharing my screen. Um, and yeah, so we're good, right? Um, yeah. So all right,
Yeah, we can
we're
see
good,
you
right?
and we can
Super,
see the
super.
screen. Yes.
Perfect. So thanks. Um, so all right. First of all, thank you so much for making the time, and I hope everyone is safe and sound and joining us here. And yeah, with that, we'll begin. Um, so today, as part of my talk, I would like to explore three sort of formations of the non-human. Um, First, I would like to explore how non-human systems are uh, shaping how we inhabit the present. Second, I'm going to trace mythological conceptions of the non-human in relation to how diseases and pandemics were imagined in the past, particularly through their mythological connection to the caste system. And lastly, I'm going to try and propose a possibility of cohabitation with non-human systems. Uh, with the help of video game-based AI programs. Um, so just before we start, I'd like to say at the onset that I'm not a scholar in any of these domains, and I've only been tracing them through my curiosities. And I'm sharing these ideas with you in hopes of sort of collectively thinking through them. And yeah, and like, just thinking through these ideas further, and like, hopefully we can kind of open this conversation up a little bit. Right. So with that, I'd like to start by giving you just a brief sense of my practice. Through my work, I'm building this growing mythological universe that's slowly unfolding in our world. And as it does so, it starts taking the shape of the forms and narratives of our world. Um, sorry. So I set this up for myself in like around 2010 as a kind of game that would allow me to potentially be able to create with whatever I could get my hands on. And over time, um, it became a way for me to also sort of make sense of the world around me. Um, so, for example, say I would find a train handle one day, and uh, so Romy, this you'll keep adding people as well. No? I think people are still kind
Yes,
of
yes, yes, I will, yes.
Um, so sorry. So I was like I was saying, say for example, I find a train handle one day, and that would kind of go into a sculpture, and that sculpture would sort of become a prop in a performance, and the footage from that performance would go into a film, and the script for that film would come from pieces of, say, a story by Borges, the Argentinian magic realist writer. Um, and So all of these objects, stories, and beings started becoming non-human players of this game, this growing kind of game. Each of them would carry sort of embedded histories and their own kind of like lived sort of memories of and those would go into shaping this growing mythology. Um, right. So now in 2020, I think everyone is kind of playing a version
Hi,
of this.
hi, Sahej. Just
Sorry,
sorry,
yeah,
quickly, sorry to interrupt you.
not a problem.
A few people on Facebook are saying that you're not that audible. So if you could just maybe speak a little
Uh,
louder.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I hope this is better.
Uh,
Um,
yeah, maybe just a little bit louder. I'll keep checking the comments. If they still say that, I'll come back to you.
cool, cool. I'm just gonna try to maybe even uh, set my audio settings, like to see if the uh,
Yeah, you could do
sorry,
that.
give me a second. Um, is this better? I've switched it to automatically adjust. So
Yeah, this is better.
super, super. Okay, thanks. So Okay, so in 2020, I think everyone's sort of playing a version of this game by themselves. Sorry. Um, so yeah, by each passing day, we're sort of becoming more and more aware of the fact that there's this palpable presence of non-human systems and beings that are occupying our physical, emotional, mental spaces. Um, we are seeing the return of natural history. Biology has taken center stage. We struggle to stitch back our lives under the shadow of this global pandemic, while typhoons are becoming as commonplace as the afternoon rain. On the other hand, um, the Indian nation state has become a site of collapsing time. The past is lurking back into the present, and any semblance of democracy has all but gone away. Um, we march towards a majoritarian Hindu state that's based on this like half-baked idea of an Indo-Aryan civilizational purity. Um, so how does this happen? Um, the state orchestrates this, this idea, this conjures this idea of, this Hindu state, Hindu Rashtra, through the abduction of myth itself. It spreads false archaeological propaganda. It promises the resurrection of absentee Hindu temples in the places of mosques and churches. It feeds us empty ideals of a forgotten past through social media gurus in service of this religious, like kind of authoritarianism. Right. So while all of this is happening, the tentacles of state bureaucracy sort of slither out to revoke our fundamental rights from like especially from minorities through like anti-constitutional laws like the CA and the NRC, and they silence all forms of dissent through the UAPA. The Indian multitude is now defined by a series of exclusions and revocations of fundamental rights, turning citizens into ghosts who are wandering in the state of collapsing time. This violent form of othering, by exclusion, particularly, is rooted in the caste system. Unlike other forms of bigotry or oppression that are premised on physical difference of race or gender, not that these are any more valid, caste is premised on a purely metaphysical system. There's this mythic belief that there is a cosmic man at the center of the universe. This man is either Manu, Brahma, Vishnu, or the Vishwa Purusha, depending on which Shastra you're reading or which WhatsApp forward you're referencing. The body of this cosmic man forms the basis of caste hierarchy in Indian society. So the head gives birth to higher castes and the feet give birth to the low castes. Um, the highest is separated from the lowest in this cosmic kind of division of mind and limb. This, in effect, creates a mythological system of oppression that is aimed towards those who find themselves at the bottom of this metaphysical hierarchy. Okay, so we find examples of this in The Folklore of Bombay, this book written by Robert Enthoven. Uh, he describes how both cholera and the bubonic plague were thought to be associated with lower castes. Like, and the spread was also kind of like enmeshed uh, with the idea of like the lower caste as well. Sort of enmeshed in ideas of purity and impurity. So in one account, he describes that an outbreak of a disease would automatically be linked to people from the lower castes doing black magic, or it would result from there was this sort of goddess of cholera, this cholera mother, like and she was Mahamari Devi, and it was like so cholera would spread because of her anger, and again like so it was supposedly believed that only the lower caste would worship her, and they were sort of this kind of vessel of communicating with her. So So it's almost like they're the whoever sort of put in the lowest in the caste hierarchy is kind of pushed into this domain of this kind of non-human force of nature. Cholera, this disease being this kind of force of nature, and it's almost like you're kind of dehumanized by pushed into that realm of like belonging to being part of this like kind of chaotic force. Um, okay, so in one particular example of the spread of cholera, um, especially the origin of cholera. There's a story of this young boy from a lower caste who would walk past a house inhabited by Brahmin students, and he would walk past every day and hear them reciting, verses from the Vedas. And this sort of instilled in him like curiosity, and he wanted to become a scholar of Sanskrit himself. So he conceals his caste identity and travels to Banaras, where he studies diligently and he becomes a scholar. Uh, Anyway, one day his caste identity is discovered, it's revealed, and he's shamed by the high caste scholars into burning himself to death. Yeah. At this moment, the ashes sort of rise into the air and they're transformed into cholera. Okay. So now this kind of parable of a story also sort of subverts our view of nature as well. Like there's this anthropocentric view of the world as this, that it exists as this resource for us to for the human particularly to conquer, to claim, sort of reap its fruits. Anyway, through this parable, what happens is that idea of nature as resource is transformed into this chaotic revolutionary sort of force of the non-human, that can kind of not only it challenges and dismantles pretty much everything, and like all these structures that the human sort of imposes, and like kind of defines, like in its definition by exclusion, like how the human sort of structures itself is challenged and dismantled through this like force of nature essentially. Um, Anyway, so with that, I'm going to kind of go over to my work with AI programs. Uh, just to kind of sum things up right now where we are is so we saw that like there's this we find ourselves right now in the present moment. We're sort of in this state of dissections between the subject and society, between the self and spectre, between past and future, and between the mind and the limb, right? And anyway, so while I was thinking about all of this and also thinking about my own kind of practice, and like these objects that were kind of non-human sort of actors in building this mythology, um, what was happening was I'll just turn this on. Give me a second, please. Um, so not sure if the yeah, okay. So it's going to get very loud once I turn the audio on. So I'll warn you before that I do that. But right now I'm assuming that it's off. Right. Anyway, so what you're seeing here is this. One sec. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. We're back, right? So you're seeing this little blob-like thing that's kind of wandering this space. Anyway, so I was thinking about like what happens when there is a suturing that happens between mind and limb, right? And what kind of like beings can we conceive of, or what kind of sort of worlds that we can conceive of that can be imagined through the suturing of these kind of dissections. So that kind of led me to what you're seeing right now, which is this program that I built called Juggernaut. And what this thing does is that it sort of wanders this landscape and oh wow, okay, it's finally picked something up. So it lets me like kind of illustrate what I'm going to say now as well. Is that it wanders this landscape and starts picking up bits and pieces of architecture. Um, and it does this like sort of on its own uh, volition. Like, it's kind of all done by itself. Now, as it picks these objects up, it starts kind of building, essentially, like you saw right now, it's sort of building structures around itself. And then it starts using these structures to create, appendages that it uses to move across this landscape. Um, while it's doing this, it'll kind of build, like, say, hooks to sort of hang on the trees, or like, it'll kind of create like these extensions that will use to like scale the mountains that you see. um, and each time the program's reset, it'll like start this process all over again, and kind of create new forms, so create new sculptural forms around itself. And the whole idea here was to kind of create a non-human intelligence that's sort of capable of what I was doing with the sculptures itself, but have like a non-human intelligence kind of simulate what I do in a way. So it's sort of like, as it goes on, it's sort of giving shape to this narrative. um, right. So you've got this one program that's kind of basically evolving as it goes on, and as it kind of grows in shape and like in size, what also happens is like its mind sort of expands to sort of, okay, one way to think about this is like, say, for example, you were to grow another limb. You're living in this like Kafka's kind of universe where you grow another limb one day. Your mind would sort of like, expand, or your conscious mind self would expand to incorporate that limb as well. And that's essentially what's happening here. Like each extension, kind of, with each extension, there's this expansion of conscious self where it, like, the sort of distinction between limb and mind sort of blurs, and it becomes this like growing organism that's sort of emanating and kind of moving between these two vectors of mind and limb, while it's kind of moving through this landscape. Right. So this is Juggernaut. And now I'm going to show you another program that I built. Um, hmm. So, oh, right. So here, right. So here you're seeing this like large creature that's kind of like, sort of shaking. And if you kind of notice, as I speak, um, like the movement of this creature changes and starts like kind of emanating this blue foliage. And essentially why that's happening is like there's a script, like an AI script that's attached, similar to the blob that you saw in the previous program, except that here there's a script attached to each part, like each kind of polygon of the organism. And when I speak, it kind of causes like a motion, like it picks up input and causes motion, and sort of interrupts the movement of the organism. So one way to think about this is like, if I were to sort of if I were to be completely silent, yeah, it would follow this path. But the moment I start speaking, it starts like, kind of doing somersaults and right. So here you have this program that's kind of not driven by one singular program, one singular mind, but like a kind of congregation of smaller minds that come together to produce this motion, and then can be interacted with in a non-causal way, because even if I were to say the exact same thing over and over again, it would produce new motion. um, and you have this like sentient being that can essentially listen. Okay. So now just extending the ideas over here. Um, Huh. So here what happens is like what you saw right now. In fact, you have that little feature on the lower left side of the screen. But here what's happening is that this entire scene, this entire landscape that you're seeing is has a script attached to pretty much every element that you're seeing. Okay. Including all the multiple kind of features that are sort of wandering it, the grass that's moving, I mean, the wind that's actually simulating the movement of the grass, the clouds in the background, and then there's these rays of sunlight, and this four-limbed kind of feature. Essentially, what's happening here is that when I speak, it produces motion, but it also kind of like kind of well, not governs, but like kind of interrupts the flow of time in this place, because there's a script that's attached to the way time flows in this environment as well. Okay. So what that would mean is if I were to say play a drum beat, yeah, or I were to speak really, really fast, that would accelerate the movement, the entire kind of the flow of time in this environment, or it would decelerate it depending on how fast or slow I'm speaking, right? So again, you have these creatures that, like, sometimes they're hostile towards each other, they'll like push each other, or sometimes they just kind of move around each other, sometimes they dance, and they have these like kind of chaotic motions that are sort of occurring essentially. And those can be kind of interacted with through speech, through sound. Right. So you have this one thing now. And okay, so now I'm not gonna, I mean, I've turned off my screen share, but I'm not gonna turn the program off. I'm gonna start another one. So here we saw this program that can, this world that is capable of listening, right? I'm going to show you another one, which is, and I mean, just kind of fair warning, it gets pretty loud. So, like, if you're on headphones, I'd recommend that, like, you switch to computer audio or turn your, like laptop volume down, because it's going to be loud. Yeah, fair warning. um, okay, so sorry, I just have way too many programs running, and I need to turn the ones off before I play this other one. Okay, so again, fair warning, it gets loud. Yeah. So you can hear this kind of procedurally generated drone, right? What's happening is here you're seeing this, like, again, this tentacle kind of moving through the space, and as it sort of moves through the space, interacts with the environment, and you see slowly, like, other creatures kind of coming towards it as well to interact with those. It essentially produces this like mood that is represented through this procedurally modulating drone sound that you're hearing. Right? And now, essentially, what this does is this too is capable of listening. So you have this creature in the background again, like, little red guy in the background that's kind of emanating this blue. And so here you have this program that's listening and producing the sound. What it becomes in effect is a sentient kind of musical instrument. This world, or this biome, that's a sentient sort of musical instrument that that's capable of, like, producing the algorithm or the sorry, not algorithm, but like the script, and cause it to play like change the music, but then and then you could kind of respond to that,
Sahej.
or you could
Hi,
like have a
Sahej.
conversation with someone in front of it, and that would kind of conjure a particular version of the word. And like another piece, like if I were to reset the program, then it would kind of begin the sentence, like
Hi, Sahej. We are not able to hear you.
this is not right.
Hi, Sahej. Hi,
Hey,
can
hey,
you hear
hi.
me?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
One
We are
sec. I'm just
unable to
gonna
hear
change
you with
this. Hey,
the
Romy,
sound
hi.
of the AI. So maybe if
Oh,
you,
there's no
yeah.
sound.
No, like you were getting drowned out because
Oh,
of
right.
the.
Sorry.
Yes.
So, okay, so I've turned it off right now.
Okay, cool.
Right. I'm just gonna start it again. Um, or you know what? Let's go to the other one because then I can talk about
Okay.
that a little easier.
Yeah.
So anyway, but like you could hear the sound, right?
Yeah, we were
Super,
able to
super.
hear the sound.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Perfect. So, um, sorry. So this is back to the previous one. Now, what's happening here is like, say for example, if you were to play this one with the program I showed you last, you could sort of orchestrate this conversation between worlds, right? Because that would kind of produce sound, and then this one would listen, and then um, this one produces sound as well. But I've kind of turned it off just to make it a little more legible. Anyway, um, so yeah, like that's sort of where we're at right now, like where these sort of worlds are evolving. Um, and with that, like I mean, I think we can open it up to questions. Rumi, hello. Hey,
Yeah.
hi.
Yeah. Hi,
Uh,
Sahej.
so
Yes.
let me just kind of also go to how do I
Do you need my help with anything?
Nah, it's good. So maybe we can get some questions in. Do we have any like how do I go to the
Y-
chat?
Yes. So, Shujat has already asked a question on
Ah,
Zoom.
cool.
Yeah. So I think he sent it to me. So I'm going to just read it out loud.
Super.
Okay. In the larger context of apotheosis, does your work grapple with the idea of authoritarianism as linked to phenomenon, as linked to this phenomenon?
Uh, sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, in the larger context of apotheosis, does your work grapple with the idea of authoritarianism as linked to the phenomenon?
Um,
If you want to just like, I'm gonna post it for you on the chat.
right. So I'm not sure what you mean by apotheosis in this context, but like I'm just kind of assuming that you mean like like sort of authoritarianism at its highest point, essentially, right now. I'm not completely clear.
I think I'm
Like sort of, or maybe I just kind of respond to that. Just the idea of authoritarianism itself, vis-a-vis what I'm doing is like, well, I mean, it's like I see my practice kind of like a way to just make sense of what's going on. So, uh, like the fact that like we live in this like largely authoritarian state is something that like I mean, I do like I am cognizant of, and I'm also kind of interested in how the this authoritarian state itself kind of like conjures its own mythology. This idea of this mythic past that it kind of that becomes the sort of conceptual scaffold that it kind of presents itself to us on. Like that's where it's so to speak authority also comes from. Like the idea of a glorious past that we need to return to, and so I'm kind of interested in like what the seams of that are. Like how does that idea just frame itself? Um, yeah. like, and possibly like, I mean, counter it, because like it's essentially an absurd idea that's being put in front of us.
Sahej?
Yeah, hi Maud.
Hi. Can you speak to the idea of authorship in your work, especially in the AI works, where there's some sense in which the work itself has its own generative quality? Where does the hand of the artist reside in these kinds of works?
So just generally, even outside of the AI work that I do, I'm kind of like interested in taking the like the place of a viewer itself. Like, I mean, I see myself as a viewer of this kind of unfolding kind of like narrative that's like, kind of growing on. And uh, I mean, essentially what happens is uh, like like this world has kind of like its own sort of language that it's speaking and it's like taking shape. What happens specifically with the AI is like it starts taking an active role in the shaping of that narrative, the sort of physicality of it, the the color of it, and but like even with the non-AI based work, I'm more interested in how does like so these can be thought of as like kind of absurd sort of occurrences that we're like kind of navigating, like the viewer, I mean myself as well, like as like kind of navigating, and then we kind of collectively sort of makes meaning of them. Like so we
Hi, Sahej. Sorry to
hey, no
interrupt
worries.
you.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, but you're still not audible enough. So could you be
Oh,
speak a little
sorry.
louder, please?
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Is it better now?
It's still the same.
Oh wow. Okay. So
Just shout.
uh, sorry, I'm just like kind of looking at the audio settings once more. Um, huh, um, is this better? Is this better?
Yep, it's
I
great.
Okay.
think it. I
Yeah.
think it's still this.
I'm like really close to my mic right now.
Okay.
um, so the funny thing is I got the like my headphones don't have like a mic on it, so I have to kind of speak into my laptop.
Okay.
So yeah, so like what's happening with this kind of world is that is that we're all kind of making sense of it like collectively, right? So there's like multiple authors, and I'm always kind of like trying to sidestep the role of the author. Like I mean, I didn't really make these things; I just found them, and they're a lot more fun to play with that way, and also yeah, like I mean, they like then you don't necessarily have to see them in the bracket of like an artwork. They could be like um, just some kind of absurd things that landed from like through a portal from this other universe, or like or could be anything. Like they sort of like already have like this kind of absurd charge to them, and I like to kind of like keep as much distance as possible from them to allow them to have that charge by themselves, because they can sort of reveal new sort of narratives and like kind of unfold new narratives each time you kind of like approach them with yeah.
Okay, we've got a question here from Buddhaditya Chattopadhyay. What is the role of artificial intelligence in these series of works? Is it based on machine learning?
So no, it's not based on machine learning at all. Machine learning is obviously like a very advanced form of AI, right? Like what I'm working with is like very basic AI scripts, like that stuff that you would see in video games. So like video game characters, like especially the way video games are set up is like you'll have like I mean, I don't, like essentially dumb AI, which reacts to player input. So like the enemy, or like what's basically a non-player character. So like depend like as you're navigating through the video game world, these characters would respond to you. So like enemies would come and like kind of fire at you or whatever, and they're always sort of working in response to the player, right? So it's sort of almost like secondary in that way. Now, what's happening in these simulations is that like that whole idea of input, at least causal input, that would like be, you press a button and then like a certain thing happens, is taken away entirely. Like, the only way we're interacting with this thing is like it's picking up sound. Like right now, it's picking up sound from my microphone. And that is causing, well, like is kind of interrupting the flow of the way these scripts are moving, right? And the motion that's being produced is constantly, it's sort of like self-driven, right? Like it's kind of producing this motion by itself. Like it's not, I'm not animating any of it. So these scripts are essentially animating them, and then each time I were to reset the program, it would take a completely, these features would take like a completely different path. And with the audio reactive programs, they would like respond in different sort of non-causal ways. And with the sound-based programs, like the last one that I showed you, the multi-tentacled one, you would have a new kind of musical score that is produced, because its mood would sort of change with each iteration. Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to just broaden the conversation out, and following on from my last question, Tasneem Mehta has kindly asked the way that where is the or let me just repeat what she said to follow what I said. Just ask, do the AI characters influence your conception of your painted work, and vice versa? So how does one bleed into the other, and where are the boundaries and where are the blurred lines between them?
So I'm still kind of sort of charting the seams of those myself. Something I've started kind of playing with is sort of 3D scanning. Well, I mean, these creatures that you were seeing, like the ones in the orange kind of program, the four-legged one, was actually made with like 3D scans, well, like kind of very low-res sort of 3D scans of my own sculptures. So like, there's these kind of bollards and like, I mean, pieces of wooden pegs or whatever that I was using that I'd kind of put into the program. Like, I mean, kind of reduce them to like really kind of polygonal or whatever, and then have them playing in this thing. Another thing that I've started doing is kind of building worlds where like slowly my own, like the sculptures that I make kind of start coming into this world. And as far as the paintings go, well, they're parallel in a way that, like, I mean, I guess they sort of like inform my color sensibility and all that. But other than that, like, the paintings themselves are kind of like almost stand in opposition to the AI programs in a certain way. Now, I'll kind of like elaborate this a little bit by like, let's just have one of the images from the paintings, so you kind of know what I'm talking about. Sorry. Okay. So I'm just going back to the right. So like here, for example, like I mean, these paintings essentially were made as part of this ever expanding portfolio, and my kind of reference for these was to sort of trace a completely like contrary sort of origin story of this mythology that I'm creating. And I was thinking of the whole idea of like the cosmography, like this. So the cosmography was this like kind of manuscript essentially, and you would find them in the Mughal, in the Mughal court. You would find them in Iran, in sort of the medieval Islamic world, where there would these massive kind of volumes that were being produced, which were essentially encyclopedias, but they were kind of encyclopedias of like the not just the known inhabited world, but also everything that's imagined. So everything that the mind could think of would be like put on page. And the whole idea here was to kind of create this like tome or like collections of tomes of everything. And so I wanted to create one of these cosmographies for myself as well. Like, well, not for myself, but for this world, and for myself as well, because I enjoyed. But except here, what was going on was like each page is like they're non-standard. So like some paintings are like really small, like, and some of them like the tiger, for example, is massive. It's like almost 5.5 feet or something. And what's interesting about this is like I was thinking, what if there's this book where you're only finding pages of it, and it's sort of expanding with each page, but it's also changing in size. Like so the entire book is like kind of morphing, and you don't really know what the scenes of it are, and you don't know what the size of the volume is as well. Um, and so Borges, coming back to like this, he's sort of like my go-to guy and all, wrote this thing about the book of sand. He created this or imagined this book that would grow each time you would turn a page, and or like he even conceives of these infinite libraries, and this sort of became this fun way of like approaching that whole like idea of infinity, but like not by rendering it, but like rendering the incomprehensibility of it. And that like that's just like one of the kind of puzzles that I'm interested in. Like how do you render the incomprehensible? And obviously you can't, but like I mean, like there's this it's this fun game, like that you can play with, like in terms of how do you conceive of that which is sort of just by definition beyond beyond rendering or beyond conception in a way. Yeah.
I have a question from Ushmita Sahu. Your AI projects have interesting titles such as Juggernaut, Shrota, etc. Do you, if at all, make connections with Indian mythology and philosophy within these futuristic, almost post-dystopian landscapes?
Yes, but like there's kind of like this passing sort of reference to them. So Shrota is like, I mean, means listener essentially, like in Hindi and Sanskrit. And like I mean, anyone who's heard a like kind of like a Hindi podcast would know about this. But like Shrota is interestingly also this demon that was kind of what was the story? Was basically cursed, like kind of condemned to. So it was supposed to tie the reins on Surya, the sun god's chariot, and fell asleep. Right, it fell asleep on the chariot itself. So now this demon was cursed with like basically cursed to listen for all eternity, right? And that's where kind of the story sort of comes together as well. That like what if this demon is supposed to just listen to like all kind of input that we give it, but like not really listen in the way that like I mean it can hear but not listen, because it's like kind of responding non-causally in a way. Uh, so there's that. Also, I'm kind of interested in like I mean, okay, so there was this essentially this supernatural being that was like given a job, right? And it sort of fell asleep during what it was doing, and then it was kind of condemned. And what is the hidden mythology over there? This is obviously like kind of a story that's being told to us. And even with Juggernaut, like so the interesting thing about Juggernaut is like so it comes from a corruption of the word Jagannath, like the kind of massive like trucks that's kind of I mean, I don't know if it's still going to be the Rath Yatra is still happening in Puri or not. But so Jagannath is this like strange kind of like abstract sort of avatar, well, not avatar, but like form of Vishnu, right? And he's this world aspect, right? Which means that everything is Jagannath. So this conversation that we're having right now, like through the magic of the internet, the air we're breathing, everything, all of this is Jagannath, right? In now, it's this like formless kind of strange thing that's kind of like ethereal and super set. Everything is included in it. And how do you kind of conceive of that? In fact, each time you even kind of like begin to step outside it to kind of produce that set, it would kind of expand to include the position that you take outside. I was kind of interested in this again, this like absurd idea of infinity that this thing kind of like represents, and also the kind of strangeness of it, like right, because it's this like unending thing, like it's also immensely violent, like I mean, so I forget. Well, yeah, the story essentially goes that like during the bubonic plague, I think what had happened was like the Rath Yatra. I keep saying Yatra, so Rath Yatra. The Rath Yatra in Puri was responsible for the spread of like for like this outbreak to kind of expand and like just become uncontrollable. And we kind of see that happening now as well with the Rath Yatra happening again during the coronavirus outbreak pandemic. So it's almost like history kind of like repeating itself, but as this kind of farce.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask you this question. We need to decode it together. This is from Subhani Suri. How is the sensorium of listening that you conceive of for the creatures differentiated from that of an anthropocentric listening? Also, how is their intelligence, quote unquote, mapped to listening beyond a set of audio reactive input-output operations? Indeed.
Yeah, very good. So this is something I also need to think about a little more. But like, yes, it is. There is the like I ascribe the idea of listening to it. Like how does one conceive of the idea of listening, which would be an anthropocentric view? Like, I mean, how does one conceive of an outside of this anthropocentric view, right? Like, is sort of, I think, where your question is kind of also referring to. I mean, I cannot claim to have like kind of like a post-anthropocentric view in that sense. Like, I mean, I can only recognize the limits of it because, like, I mean, but then here, like, essentially, what I'm kind of even proposing for that matter is, and yeah, that's essentially what these things are. They're sort of like propositions and rehearsals of these possible worlds. They're not like, I don't think this is like what the post-human is or the but like I'm kind of trying to it's sort of like an attempt at a proposition, and like, I mean, I do not think that like it's sort of beyond like that, beyond the idea of like or I have some sort of like post-anthropocentric position that I'm taking. I'm not really post-human yet. But
then should I ask you a more technical question, which you will be able to answer more easily?
Yeah, for sure.
This is regarding the objects of the AI program. Do they react to the frequency of the sound or the amplitude? Would they react differently based on the pitch of the sound or the loudness of it? And that's from Saket Gyani.
So both actually. Like, so it picks up frequency. It picks up like how like the sort of range of sound. Like, so it'll pick up volume, but it'll also pick up frequency, both. And like each so like in the kind of larger sort of the orange program, for example, like Antral, each aspect is kind of like attached to a different is picking up audio and responding to a specific aspect of sound. So for example, like just take the flowers that were coming out of that red little creature. The frequency with which I speak is going to determine, or like kind of not determine, but influence the amount of like flowers that come out, or the foliage that comes out. But I mean, I don't know if you guys noticed, but like, they were sort of also like kind of expanding, like, they were doing this thing where they, like, as they sort of dissipate, they kind of increase and decrease in size while they go about. And that was mapped to volume, right? So, but then it's not mapped to volume in the way that, like, if I were to make like a very loud sound, it would just go like, it would even kind of come down, because there's these two parameters that are working, like it's sort of oscillating between like two mean, like, like two sort of values, and then like it kind of goes up, and then like if the sound sort of exceeds that, it would kind of become smaller as well, and then kind of move this way. Yeah.
Okay, and then an allied question to that from Saket again is, do the objects of the AI project reach any conclusion?
No, they don't. Which is, well, I mean, one conclusion that they have reached is like, they've crashed my computer multiple times. But as far like, there's no sort of end. There's no like sort of game over kind of screen. These things could just run like ad infinitum, like, and again, that's another thing that I'm kind of interested in, like, is um, how, like, what, like, if you were to say, for example, with Juggernaut, where it's picking up these things, how, what is the shape of that, like, I mean, infinity that it would produce, like this world would produce if it was just left to roam, essentially. One interesting thing with Shrota is that, okay, so I've kind of created these invisible boundaries. Okay, so imagine this like kind of aquarium, right, in the space, and then what you're seeing is kind of inside that aquarium or terrarium or whatever. Uh, now, thinking that, like, I mean, I've simulated gravity and all that. Like, well, the program simulated gravity, so it's not gonna, whatever, go outside. And there's these like walls around it, so you don't really need to put like a lid. And I didn't put a lid over there. Anyway, now what happens is, like, at some point, there's these like, when it's, and this is not a glitch, yeah. The program kind of figures out that there's this one place on the sort of mountain wall that of the sort of terrarium that it can climb and kind of essentially exit that entire universe. Like, it'll kind of jump out, right? Like, and it sort of like does that, but this thing, like, it doesn't happen all the time, but like it's done it way too many times for me to like think, okay, how is it trying to figure this out every? So like I remember this happened almost 5 times one day. And I was like, wait, what is going on over here? Because there's no memory. Every time I reset it, like there's no kind of data saved or anything. It just starts over all over again. Anyway, so each avatar like manages to jump out and like kind of leave the space and then just starts floating in this kind of blue void. Uh, yeah, so that's one version of like where it kind of, I guess, exits, if not like kind of comes to completion.
Thank you, Sahej. Listen, I'd like to say, if anyone finds any of these AI objects, and if they do float away outside your program, they're still the property of Chatterjee and Lal, and we still have every right to sell them in any public platform that we so choose. So don't think that they belong to anyone just because you can find them on the street. Sahej, thank you so much
thank you.
For responding to all of these questions, for giving us such a great presentation. Somehow we have managed to successfully broadcast across 3 platforms. So all our hard work has been worth it. Thank you so much to you, to Romy, and to the rest of the team. And to all our listeners on YouTube, Facebook, and Zoom, thank you. And we will soon have information about our next event. So that's it from us. Sahej, a goodbye to you.
I just have one thing to say. So there's like Juggernaut is kind of like, you can download like a playable version of it on my site, and so yeah, like I mean, if people want to check it out and like just play it, you can download it and like also write to me whatever, a few questions or whatever, like yeah, and it was great to share my work with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Sahej. Thank you, everyone. And so we'll be closing the meeting now.